Are you ready?
Yeah.
You don't need to be ready yet. All right, good afternoon. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. The Lord be with you. That usually works in church crowds. It's pretty cool. We are thrilled to have you here today. My name is Philip Lotspeech. I'm the General Presbyter for Transylvania Presbytery. I should be John Odom, the General Presbyter for Mid-Kentucky, but he had to go away. I don't know if you heard, his daughter was great with child and had that baby yesterday. So John is in Greensboro, North Carolina with Elijah and Lizzie and their whole family. A boy? Did I say girl? It's a boy, right? I've got a picture. We'll try to get a picture up here later. Cutest little thing. I'm not sure it comes from John's genes, though. We'll have to... Well, I'm just kidding. I like John. I just mess with him. But John would be here, and he sends his regrets, but we told him he's exactly where he needs to be. I think that's part of the church, realizing that these meetings are important. We find this important. We're glad you're here, but being with family and taking care of those things are great. First of all, we're just going to do a couple of recognitions. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to have everybody do a little game because I'm just curious. I'm going to, if you've lived in Kentucky at least 1 week, would you stand up? At least 1 week. All right. Now, if you've lived in Kentucky more than a year, stay standing. If you've lived in Kentucky less than a year, sit down. If you've lived in Kentucky less than a year, sit down. Okay, nobody sat down, right? If you've lived in Kentucky less than 5 years, if you moved to Kentucky 5 years ago or less, sit down. Wow. Still going strong. 10 years. If you've lived in Kentucky less than 10 years, have a seat. Wow, Kentuckians, y'all got some staying power. There's not a lot of... If you've lived in Kentucky less than 15 years, have a seat. All right, a few of you. If you've lived in Kentucky less than 20 years, so that would be 2003. If you've lived in Kentucky since 2003, stay standing. If not, have a seat. Wow. I thought we'd have a few of you down this time. Okay, if you've lived in Kentucky less than 30 years, 1993. If you've lived in Kentucky for less than 30 years, okay. If you've lived in Kentucky less than 40 years, if you've only been alive for 40 years. No, I'm kidding. We don't have that many in here. If you've lived in Kentucky less than 40 years, have a seat. Less than 50 years. 50 years would be 1973. Okay, if you've lived in... Now we're getting to age ranges, right? And that's what we're doing. If you've lived in Kentucky less than 60 years. 70 years. So all of you have lived in Kentucky over 70 years. Anybody over 80 years? If you've lived in Kentucky 80 or more years, stay standing. If you can, stay standing. I should have said that. Give them a round of applause. That's amazing. That's amazing. So this is the fun thing about getting together. Getting together with people from around Kentucky is that, we've been, a lot of you have, I haven't been here that long. I've only been here like 15 years. But a lot of you have been here for your whole life. And so there used to be this thing called the Synod of Kentucky. And back in the day, Kentuckians gathered a lot. And over time, like has happened with most of our world, we've become fractured and splintered. We've gotten so busy. We've gotten caught in our own little worlds. And it feels like I've got to drive 3 hours to go to a meeting to meet with other Kentuckians. I don't know if I want to do that or not. But we decided a few years ago that it was important for us to build those relationship backs and to draw on the DNA of the past, right, to do something now. And so this is the third gathering we've had of Presbyterians in Kentucky. We had the first one in Danville, the second one in Bowling Green, and this one in Louisville. And in a couple of years, we'll do another one. Our plan is to keep that going. And just as a reminder, part of the plan is also to figure out how we can work together. Because we really do believe we're better together than we are separate. And all of us are doing COMs, we're all doing CPMs, we're all doing mission work. Most of us are doing disaster recovery these days. We're all engaged in a lot of the same ministries. And so why should we try to do them separately? Why can't we do them together? That is tough because our presbytery has its own culture. In fact, we've got 3 or 4 different cultures within our presbytery. Mid-Kentucky's got its own culture. Western Kentucky's got its own culture. So there are some things about us that make us unique. But I think that's what makes us fun, is that diversity, being able to learn and grow and see what other people are doing. Because I know for our presbytery, we don't have all the answers. And so we always need help from our brothers and sisters across Kentucky. So we're excited to have you here. Hopefully you meet somebody new. Hopefully you're not sitting in your little bubbles already, right? You're not sitting in your with all your transy folks or your mid-Kentucky folks or your Western Kentucky folks. Branch out a little bit at dinner. And here, let's pray. God, for all the things you've done for us today, the things you've done for us in the past, and the things you're going to do for us in the future, we are so thankful. We're thankful that those have gathered here from across this state to be witnesses to what you do in our life, to share ministry together, and to consider and think and dream about what life can be living in your kingdom. Be with us this day. Bless those that have come. Bless all that have made it possible here, that we would glorify you in all we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We have one person we want to bring greetings this morning. Is Ann Laird Jones here? Where is it? Come on up. She is the moderator of our synod, and so we wanted to give her the opportunity to greet everybody.
Thank you. It is really good to see you all. 40-something years ago, I stood here in this sanctuary and became a candidate of what was then Louisville Presbytery, sponsored by Harvey Brown Presbyterian Church. And since that time, have really celebrated at every turn all the stories I keep hearing about all of you, every one of you, and every presbytery in Kentucky, and what used to be the Synod of Kentucky, which is now, we're so excited that we are part of a bigger collaborative group called the Synod of Living Waters. Now, all day I've been meeting you and talking to you, and the question seems to be, what is a synod moderator? And what does a synod do? Or do we still have synods? And so the question about the synod moderator is one that I've really been struggling to find an answer. I've asked the same question. It seemed to me that often what you do as a synod moderator is you are polite and you recognize everybody. And so usually I'm really noisy and not as polite probably. So that was it. I thought, okay, how can we stretch this? And I decided what I really wanted to do in these 2 years is to meet you. And so anytime you'd like a visitor at your church, I will drive many miles to come to you. And it was something to drive up right after your election this week and realize Kentucky is a place of many voices, many thoughts, many celebrations, and to come to this place where to be with you where 3 presbyteries are meeting together. Some things about our synods. Synods are alive and well, and I'm really interested. This morning I was able to go to Mark's amazing, was it a class, was it a workshop, a gathering this morning, and to think about new ways of seeing the world, and the idea of synods as a way of collaboration where we learn from each other, where we lift up the gifts of each of the presbyteries in our synod, as we think about what other synods are doing that we could learn from, instead of all having to do the same thing, knowing that we can't all do all things well, but we can together do things great. Some facts about the Synod of Living Waters you may not have known when you woke up this morning, but I know you'll want to mention this Sunday in all your sermons, that we have 12 presbyteries. It's like the disciples. We have 12 presbyteries in our Synod. Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama. We have, listen to this, 68,449 plus members. And now that Elijah is here, we have another Presbyterian. We have 597 churches in our synod, and we have 13 full covenant partners. We're on the brink, and it may be by Sunday we will be at number 14, because working with the really amazing and creative Alabama Home for Children that is about to become the 14th covenant partner. We have 2 seminaries, one of which was within our bounds, with a new president, Andrew Palmerville, who will be preaching tomorrow. And I had the opportunity of meeting him for the first time yesterday, and I was just blown away with his energy, his creativity, because that's another thing happening. I think every theological institution has decided to have a new president within the last minute. And so we're at a time in our denomination of having this new energy, this new vision that's just so exciting. But we have Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary and Columbia Presbyterian Theological Seminary, our 2 covenant seminary partners. We have a lot of colleges and institutions. We have Living Waters for the World, and you're going to hear from Steve in just a minute about that. But our name, Living Waters for the World, and the Living Waters for the World, which has just installed, we think, 1,101 water systems in 27 countries, and you're going to hear more about that in a moment. We have Presbyterian women in all of our 12 presbyteries who are doing so much. One of the things happening in our presbytery, I'm a member of St. Andrew Presbytery in the northern half of Mississippi. And it's only 9 hours there, and if you're going south, it's only 8 hours because you gain an hour. So you should come visit us. But we, a church 7 miles down the road in Leland, Mississippi, Leland Presbyterian Church was just commissioned last Sunday as a site where you can go and take up to 29 people. They had an education wing that was not being used. They've completely converted it into a place with beds and a kitchen and meeting rooms, and listen to this, showers. You can even take baths when you come down to Mississippi. But this is 35 miles away from Rolling Fork. Remember the tornadoes hit, and so there are so many different things to be done in different parts of our synod, but places like Leland, they've named it Windward, and places where we welcome one another to come and do work and do mission. There's so many stories. One way to find out about those stories is, now I don't know if you're like me, but I save things. I don't know if you all save things, but how many of you, now that we've talked about how long people have lived in Kentucky, how many of you still have the September 2010 issue of The Voice? All right, if you're missing that one, how about the March 2011? I think this was the final one. Jerry, do you remember? This was the final one? So what's happened, we have an instrument. Now it's called the virtual voice. And listen to this, Eugenia Gamble. How many of you know Eugenia Gamble? She's the editor. And she is just really pushing us. There is going to be an edition that will come out in a few weeks for Advent called Preparing the Way. My article is not due until Sunday night. So I'm working on the idea of Christmas Eve, because this year, Christmas Eve, as you know, has Fourth Advent and Christmas Eve, which is I just thought, it's an incarnational arc. It's so exciting. We can use our congregations and have them help us take down the purple and put up the white and move the candles around. The little church I serve in Sumner, Mississippi said, oh no, how will we prepare for the party that night? Because in our town, the whole town watches fireworks at night. But what I'm interested in is what you're doing and how many of you, how you're handling that. Because it's just really interesting to think how we're handling that unique day when everything is colliding and coming together. So that's a good metaphor. How are we handling being a synod in these times? I'm going to ask you if you will really bug your presbytery execs, Philip and John and Ralph. Did I get everybody? Who else? Did I get everybody I need to suggest bugging? Yes, I want you to, because they can, Philip says to bug Ralph, to help you all make sure that every church is signed up and every member is signed up to receive this virtual voice, because it has all kinds of articles, and it's another way of connecting us together in a more up-to-date way to find out, what does it mean to be a synod? What does it mean to collaborate? How do we lift up gifts and celebrate in this creative way how to be good stewards of all of these amazing talents and genius genius and brilliant ideas that we have going, particularly as I look out to these 3 presbyteries. The website is synodlw.org. Maybe we should all get tattoos. synodlw.org, so that you can always get the virtual voice. And that way you don't have to write me and borrow this one from long ago. But thank you. Look forward to seeing you.
The last thing before I introduce Mark is I want to just thank Harvey Brown Presbyterian Church. Their staff has been great. Their members have been here welcoming. It's perfect. And I'm going to introduce Christine Coyfor, who's the pastor, to come up and say a word.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say hello. I'm a child of Western Kentucky Presbytery, was ordained in Western Kentucky Presbytery and served, so it's fun to see so many people. And Western Kentucky Presbytery knows that I have a gift where anytime we host an event, some kind of disaster happens. So I want to make sure you all know where you need to go if anything happens. It's a beautiful day outside, which is wonderful. But if you need to exit this building quickly, there are exits here, and obviously out the back. And there's actually a space underneath the sanctuary, so if suddenly a storm broke out, there are stairs out in the foyer that will take you underneath. We did this in Western Kentucky when First Pres hosted, so just wanted to make sure to get that out of the way. And also, if you haven't found the restrooms yet, if you go out and look immediately to the right, there is a ramp that will take you up to the 2nd floor, just in case you're needing an accessible restroom up there. But we're so grateful that you're here, so grateful that you've taken time to come to St. Matthew's and be with us at Harvey Brown.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you. So to get right to it, I'm going to have Mark come up. Come on up, Mark. Mark is our speaker for the afternoon. Mark is from Madison, Wisconsin, which is cool because I don't think anybody really cares about football or basketball or anything like that in Madison, Wisconsin, right? Y'all don't do that kind of thing. So at least they're not the SEC, so we don't have to have this like rivalry. You know, Mark is a bit of a unicorn. I didn't tell you this last night, but you're a bit of a unicorn. Mark got out of seminary and went to Press House on the University of Wisconsin campus. He's been there for 20 years, right out of seminary. That's fairly rare, my friends, to go and be able to stay at some place that long. That says a lot about the ministry he's doing and the work he's doing. Thrilled. I got a chance to read the book as kind of a preview book, and when I didn't understand a lot of it, Mark, so hopefully, it's that MBA after his name that there's a lot of technical stuff in there. But learning how to use church properties, thinking about, future ministries, entrepreneurial kinds of things, and it just started so many conversations in my head that, we said, maybe we need to have Mark come and start talking to us, because I don't know how Western and Mid-Kentucky are doing it, but we tend to be closing a few churches lately. We have a number of buildings that are underutilized. We have opportunities, even in small communities, to do something maybe entrepreneurial and enterprising. But how do you do that? And so Mark's here to kind of start that conversation. I don't think he's here to give us all the answers, but hopefully he'll get our conversation started. So Mark, glad you're here, buddy.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think you can hear me on this, yes? Okay, great. I'm not even sure I put this on right, but it's quite the contraption that, yeah. I hope everyone had a good lunch. Yes, I had a wonderful lunch with some wonderful people. I was really blessed by that. And I'm going to try my best to not let us all fall asleep here post-lunch. So I'm going to talk for a little while about some of these ideas, and then we'll have a little bit of a break and a chance to do some Q&A, and then we're going to do some interactive stuff together and conversation about this stuff later in the afternoon. So that's kind of the scope of it. So thanks for the chance to talk with you today. I am a PCUSA pastor, and I work with churches all over the country through my work at Rooted Good, and I am very aware of the narrative of scarcity that dominates much of our thinking in the church. So, as we know, many Christian churches and related institutions in the U.S. are facing an imminent crisis, or at least struggling in many ways. Attendance is down. We've heard this all over and over again, right? Funding is harder to come by. Churches are closing, and buildings are being sold at an incredible pace. Climate change, wealth inequality, and racial tension are massive problems facing our communities that the church is struggling to respond to. People are no longer drawn to traditional church services and programming in the ways that they once were. And the pandemic has accelerated all of those trends, which leaves us many times feeling broke, exhausted, and powerless to do much about it all. We continually try to do more with less, fewer people, fewer dollars, fewer churches. But I do believe that there is a hope and a future, and that's what I want to talk about today. So my aim is to spark some new ways of thinking and being in the world so that together we can transform communities, address injustice and inequality, and sustain effective ministry during this time of major change. I might raise some questions that feel a little uncomfortable. I'm going to just say that right now. Partly because I'm going to be talking about money. And money is one of those things that often makes us feel a bit uncomfortable, right? Despite being Jesus' sort of number one topic next to love, it is a subject that can get touchy. And I'm totally fine if you don't agree with much, if anything, of what I say today. That's fine. I'm trying to spark some conversation and some thinking. So there's a couple ways that you can handle that if you don't agree with it or you have questions. One is you have index cards, hopefully nearby, and feel free to write questions on those as the session goes on, and we'll collect those during a little break, and I'll respond to some of those questions at the end. The other is that you're welcome to respond here by using this QR code, and you can fill out a little form that will give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you that way too. So both of those are ways that you can kind of engage with me, because in this size group I won't probably be able to talk to you all one-on-one. So I want to start with a story about a young heroin addict who I will call Peter. It was the second time that Peter had relapsed in just a matter of months, and one of countless times he had turned to heroin in the past few years. He had tried to quit for good, and he had tried and he had tried and tried, but the pull of a drug that takes the lives of more than 15,000 Americans each year was just too much. It didn't matter that he'd almost died of an overdose in the past. It didn't matter that his life had been derailed and he'd hurt many of the people who loved him most. It didn't even matter that he was back in school as a student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for the second time with a chance to finish and graduate, because the draw of the drug was just too strong. The disease too powerful. What more could he do? Was there any hope of escape? And what, if anything, could a church do to help? A lot, it actually turns out. A church could do a lot. So Peter was living in a sober housing program run by Press House, which is the Presbyterian campus church where I serve as executive director, when this latest relapse occurred. He had relapsed once in the program already. But this time, rather than being written off as a lost cause, our staff and other residents held him accountable to the recovery plan that he'd put in place for himself and supported him through this latest setback. And this time it worked. With the help of his next step roommates and other resources, Peter moved deeper into his journey of recovery. He began to find success in school and make meaningful friendships on campus. Hope was reborn. By the time Peter had graduated from college with a 3.5 GPA and a degree in computer engineering, he'd taken a job at a well-known company. He'd also run a marathon and mended relationships with many of those he hurt while using heroin. He was a peer mentor in the Next Step program and an officer in the campus recovery student organization. Most importantly, he was sober. And Peter's not the only one. About 80% of the participants in the Next Step Sober Housing Program at the Press House Apartments over the years have either graduated from degree programs, remained sober, or both. In recent years, we've heard statistics that more than 100,000 people die of drug overdoses in the United States every year. At a time when the opioid crisis is wreaking havoc on communities all over the country, perhaps in your own community, this program has saved lives, and it saved Wisconsinites more than $1 million in costs associated with addiction. And at a moment when many churches are struggling to figure out what role to play in the world, where fewer people attend worship services, but these wicked, difficult, complex problems need our attention, Press House was truly there for Peter and his friends. What may be most remarkable about all of this is that Peter's life had been transformed by living in an apartment building that was built by a Peace USA campus ministry on an underutilized church-owned parking lot, and later financed with an impact investment from, at first, a synod endowment. I know all this because I parked in that lot as on my first day as a pastor. So let me back up and show you some images about this. So a long time ago, 116-ish years or so, to be more precise, in a culture and church environment very different from today, a group of faithful folks in Madison, Wisconsin started a campus ministry at the flagship State University. This is an image, an old image of the campus. Like many campus ministries at the beginning of the 20th century, this new student community flourished. By the early 1920s, it had outgrown its space and needed a new building. So land was purchased right on the main quad of the campus, and a beautiful Gothic church was built. Plans to build dorms for students had also been drawn up, but those dreams came crashing down with the stock market and the Great Depression. But the ministry continued to grow, and by the 1950s, Press House, as it had become known, was thriving. Then the years of decline began. Student participation plummeted in the 1960s. Church just wasn't the place to be anymore. Funding dried up. Sound familiar to anyone? This trajectory? It took a few decades to kind of reach the bottom, but by the time my spouse and co-pastor Erica Liu and I found ourselves a part of this story, Press House was resting firmly on the seabed. So about 20 years ago, when Erica and I were called to Madison for our first position out of seminary, this is us with our eldest daughter, who's now a sophomore in college. And there she is in the little front pack. That was us arriving at Press House. We found this beautiful building in dire need of updating. The roof was leaking. I was routinely fixing the toilets with paper clips just to make sure that people could still use them. My first week on the job was spent putting together a desk that I bought at Office Depot in like a kit, and I just there's like a million screws in those kits. It took me a few days to put together. And there were no students. None. Not a single student in the ministry at the time. In fact, when the first student I met wandered in, asking what happened at Press House, he said, "Does press stand for Presbyterian or like the printing press?" I was like, "No, there's one S. It stands for Presbyterian." And he's all excited. He's like, "Cool, I'm Presbyterian, I'm from Minneapolis, and what happens here?" I said, "Nothing." Nothing. There's nothing. Look, I'm building a desk. I was literally building the desk when he walked in my office. "But I'd love to invite you to stay and help us start something new." And thankfully he did. So that was the little rebirth that began. And over the next year, we prayed, and that first student is sitting there in the red Wisconsin jersey, actually. His name is Steve. We're still in touch today. That's a long time ago. But we prayed and talked and gathered and studied the small group of students to form the core of a new community at Press House. I describe it as kind of a small spark of hope that was kindled in the embers of this remarkable legacy of ministry. But the question for us at the time was, how was this spark to grow into the sustaining warmth of a real fire without any fuel? We were spending down our endowment funds at an unsustainable pace, on purpose, but it was unsustainable. Our building was literally falling apart around us. Faithful donors gave just $10,000 per year, and even less came from the denomination at that time in our part of the country. Hardly enough to sustain a historic property and pastors, staff, and the full-fledged campus ministry that we and our board dreamed of. We could consider selling the property, which was an option exercised by Presbyterians at the University of Minnesota and in Iowa, but we'd never get that prime location back. There was a spark of hope, but where would the fuel come from to keep the flame alive? So as the executive director of a faith-based nonprofit, I've done a lot of fundraising over the years, and I very often hear folks say that there just aren't the resources in the church that there once were back in the glory days, whenever those days were. And it is true that some forms of funding have declined. For example, in most parts of the country, denominational funding for campus ministry is largely gone or is very small. And declining membership has indeed led to less money for churches and for governing bodies. That is a reality. But despite decline in membership and giving, we still actually have a lot of assets, a lot of capital, incredibly valuable property in A-plus locations, buildings, and as a collective church, the PCUSA has massive endowments. In fact, I would argue that despite the decline that we talk about all the time, that we probably have more wealth in the Christian church in America than ever in history between all of those assets that I described. We are most definitely not broke. So with nothing to lose at Press House, we set about making use of those assets in a new way to fuel the ministry. It started with the property and an 80-year-old dream. Our board of directors had updated the long-held vision to build student housing on the parking lot next to the historic Press House Chapel. At the same time we began to relaunch student ministry, we also set about planning for the construction of a new 7-story apartment building. The board is willing to take a huge risk and dream big, so we borrowed $17 million from a commercial bank for the construction of the new facility and to complete a full renovation of the chapel building. This brief description vastly oversimplifies what actually happened, of course, but after 2 years of planning, more than 1 million decisions along the way, and a year of construction, we opened the Press House Apartments to 250 residents in the summer of 2007. Now, there were a lot of difficult and trying times along the way. I don't want to pretend that it was all easy. We almost lost it all when the city of Madison slapped us with a property tax bill we weren't expecting, and we had to spend more than 4 years updating state law to clarify our exemption just to survive. We had trouble filling the building in the early years and went through 3 property management companies before we could find one that would treat students with respect and effectively lease the rooms. We ran out of money during construction to repair the leaking roof, and we were only saved at the last minute by a miraculous major donation. I wasn't sure where payroll was going to come from for our hardworking staff and myself. There had been more sleepless nights than all the sheep I tried counting in the dark and worrying about all of these things over the years. But we didn't do this work. We now serve more than 1,000 students and young adults each year through Sunday worship, large campus events, small groups, and intentional communities in the apartments. One example is that Next Step program that I mentioned of students in residents in addiction recovery that Peter was a part of. Other communities are themed around vocational discernment, wellness, volunteer service, and so on. More than half of our residents receive a scholarship as being part of one of these programs, and we've given away almost $1 million in scholarships to students. Residents in the Press House Apartments typically triple the number of people they know in our building from fall to spring, which is a vastly different outcome than standard student apartment buildings. And more than 90% of church participants experience opportunities to interact with people different from them. And the vast majority report learning or trying something new in their spiritual life each year through our programs. This morning we were doing a workshop using our game Mission Possible, and we were talking about outcomes and measuring outcomes. Those are some of the outcomes I just named for you that we like to measure. Since gaining a solid financial footing, fundraising has taken off, with more than $6 million raised from individuals and churches and foundations. And because our overhead is covered entirely by rental revenue, 100% of every donated dollar directly supports students. Our budget has grown more than 1,500% from about $150,000 annually in 2004 to $2.5 million a year today. So we found that fuel. We found that fuel that we needed to grow the spark into a real flame. And we found that fuel literally in our backyard, in the parking lot that was just right behind our building, where I parked my car, and now I no longer can park there. But that's what we have now instead. We built a financially impactful social enterprise and the lives of thousands upon thousands of young adults now and every year into the future. Press House has had many supporters and partners along the way. Nothing successful ever happens in a vacuum. We also talked about that this morning, about how important partnership is. One of our most supportive partners ended up being our denominational parent body, Synod. What synods do. Synods do things. So our synod, the Synod of Lakes and Prairies, not right at the beginning, to be honest and to be fair, but in 2011, when we had to refinance our original debt on our student housing facility, the Synod of Lakes and Prairies got involved. So after the 2008 financial crisis, lending rules changed, and we had debt that we had to refinance that we easily obtained in 2007 was hard to refinance 4 years later. Despite paying all our bills on time, we were short about $2 million in financing. This near crisis, though, yet again another moment where we said, oh my gosh, we're broke, we were short $2 million, actually turned out to be a really remarkable move and moment for us. After a year of conversations, the Synod of Lakes and Prairies joined our regional bank as an investment partner in the Press House project. So together with the Synod, we again reframed scarcity and discovered that yet again, that as a church, we are not in fact broke. So let me show you how this worked. And you may have a little bit of a hard time from the back seeing this little slide screen here. But the Synod took $2.5 million, about a quarter of their endowment, out of other investment instruments like stock and bond funds, and diversified, you might say, into real estate, church real estate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So with their impact investment, we were able to secure favorable terms on the rest of our debt, and then we paid them back a return on their investment. So essentially, they took a chunk of their endowment, they invested it in our project, and then we pay them back both money and impact. Last summer, we took a major step forward on this model and refinanced all of our remaining debt, about $11 million, with church funds. We've got Jim here in the room. The Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program, in partnership with the UCC Building Loan Fund and the ELCA Loan Fund, now actually carry 100% of the remaining debt on the Press House project. The Synod's no longer directly involved, but they were a key catalyst in that moment to sort of think differently about how we could use church assets for this sort of activity. So we pay this consortium of church lenders back to PILP, really a return on their money, and they use that to do other things that are really cool around, we were talking about this at lunch, around the country, and offer other loans to other church entities. And thousands of students at the University of Wisconsin have been served by the church. And instead of the financial returns that we're paying from our housing facility flowing to a for-profit bank, those monies are going back into the church, the larger church family. The money stays in the family. It's sort of a win-win-win. And this impact investment produces these issues and challenges that really matter to them. We still do worship every Sunday, and Sunday worship is central to our mission, but we've been able to go much deeper and wider with our ministry, transforming areas of students' lives that previously we were absent from. And we found a sustainable way to pay for this work. While donor funds are still essential to accomplishing our mission, our earned income has totally changed the financial calculus and funded our growth. Most powerfully of all, the mission outcomes and the financial outcomes, they're intimately and fully integrated. So when we succeed as an organization missionally, we also succeed financially. And the same is true the other way. As we succeed financially, we also succeed missionally. We've reconnected money to mission and mission to money. Now, I'm not suggesting this sort of exact model of development investment can or should be replicated everywhere. In fact, I don't believe in models. I'm not a believer of models as a way of doing ministry. I think Press House, though, is an example. It's an example. It's just a different way of thinking about it, and it's not something that we can just sort of replicate. Nothing short of God's own hand will solve the deep problems in all contexts. But I do believe that there is real potential to put the dynamic power of social enterprise, this idea of generating revenue that's connected to mission, to work alongside the sustaining fuel of church-owned capital assets, buildings, land, and endowment money. I think we can put those things together for lasting innovation and transformation in our churches and communities. And these tools are available to us right now. These aren't things that we're like waiting for down the road at some point. They're here. We have these tools and these assets and these resources right now. We aren't actually broke. So I think our story at Press House highlights three pressing needs facing congregations and governing bodies and our communities today that these hidden resources can help us with. So I want to talk about these three kind of things and how they all converge at this moment. First, many are struggling to figure out how to fund our operations and our mission. So as we've talked about, participation and membership are in decline, which means budgets are shrinking even as costs of maintaining property rise. The financial model of the past, based on giving through an offering plate, is no longer sustainable in many settings on its own. Some churches will experiment with and find new financial models. Others will have to sell or redevelop their property. We are about to experience a major wave of assets in transition as church property changes in purpose or ownership in almost every community around the country. So I have a new book actually coming out in January. I edited this book called Gone for Good, Negotiating the Coming Wave of Church Property Transition. One of the authors who contributed a chapter, who's a Presbyterian, estimates that as many as 100,000 church properties around the United States will be sold or repurposed by 2030. Even if the number is half of that, we're experiencing a huge shift, right? And that 100,000 would be like a quarter to a third of all of them in the U.S. I mean, it's a massive shift that we're experiencing. And the sale and repurposing of this much property is located in every town, village, and city in our nation. And it has wide-reaching implications not only for the church, but for the very social fabric of our society. This transition in church property is also a once-in-a-many-generation shift. Right? Churches own property in prime locations in every corner of the country. And as that property is sold or becomes something else, it's not going to go back to being a church in any foreseeable time in the future. Right? It's a sort of a one-time shift going on here. And I tell you, I talk to and work with churches all over the country, coast to coast, urban, rural. This is happening everywhere, literally everywhere. And it is actually happening far beyond the mainline denominations. That may give you some comfort, because there's been a narrative for many, many years that this is a mainline issue and that other churches, I won't say which ones necessarily, have not been struggling with this. That is not the case. This is happening pretty much across the board. Now, this doesn't mean that every individual church is going away, or every individual church is not growing, or every individual church needs to do something with its property. But broadly, across the United States, this is happening pretty much everywhere. So the question that is before us is this. After the wave of selling and repurposing churches kind of crashes on the shore and rolls back out, what's going to be left when that water flows back out to sea? What will our neighborhoods look like if 40 out of 100 churches, or 6 out of 8, are something else in 15 years? What will be lost? What could be gained? And what could each of us to have done to encourage good when these churches are gone? It's worth noting here in this context here amongst Presbyterians what a different trajectory Press House ended up on as compared to other Peace USA campus ministry centers. So as I mentioned earlier on when I was talking that in the late 1990s there was a movement in the upper Midwest to sell Presbyterian ministry centers on campuses. And there were very good reasons for this, right? There was very good reasons. These were not sort of hasty, rash decisions. But there was a lot lost when those centers were sold. So centers were sold at the University of Minnesota and the University of Iowa. And there was an attempt made to sell Press House at the University of Wisconsin. But local alumni in Madison wisely resisted that move, and at a presbytery meeting that's infamous and has gone down in history in our town, before my time, might say, and said, nope, we're not going to sell Press House here. May have happened elsewhere, but it's not going to happen here. Fast forward a few decades, and the contrast between campuses is stark. There is little to no Peace USA presence on those other flagship state campuses. The properties are gone. The funds from the sale are largely used up. Press House property, on the other hand, is worth probably $25 million, generates more than $2 million per year in revenue, and we serve more than 1,000 students per year in our ministry. Really different outcomes from those trajectories. Now, selling property is sometimes the answer, no question about it. We have more property than we need, basically, right? So selling is sometimes the answer, but often there are other alternatives that we can look at first. The second major issue facing congregations today is that we are trying to figure out what it means to even be the church today. So while counting the number of people who show up for Sunday worship, I don't think is really a great measure of impact, the decline in participation, it definitely does indicate that something's going on, and that more and more people are not connecting with what congregations have traditionally done or offered. So if the programs of the 1950s or the 1980s are not engaging anymore, what is? What does it mean to be a transformative presence in a community today? Obviously, the pandemic brought this question to the fore even more starkly. When a congregation isn't meeting for in-person worship on Sunday morning, what is it? What is it to be a gathered community of Christians in a town, in a city, in a village? What does it mean, and what should we be doing? Third, at the same time, we are facing some very serious, wicked problems in many of our communities. Not wicked in the sense of evil, but wicked in the sense of really complex and without simple solutions. Our neighborhoods are dealing with opioid addiction and food insecurity, a lack of living wage jobs, declining educational outcomes, the effects of climate change, and more. Very often these problems are experienced in widely disparate ways depending on one's racial, ethnic identity or family wealth. Sadly, the county I live in Wisconsin, Dane County, has one of the highest racial disparities in the nation on a number of key indicators of thriving. Many self-reflective congregations are taking notice of the fact that their buildings are often built on land stolen from indigenous people. Press House was too. And much of the founding wealth in our denomination, the PCUSA, was extracted through slavery. So churches are asking themselves, if the programs of the past aren't working, how do we be the church in the midst of these systemic, wicked problems of today? I work with young adults on college campus, and I can tell you they want to know the answer to that question. They want to know what faith communities are doing about the real issues in the world. They are echoing, I believe, the words of the prophet Amos. Take away from me the noise of your songs, but let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So all three of these realities, the need for new financial models, new expressions of mission and ministry, and ways to address deep, wicked problems in our communities, they're converging in this moment. This reality is not our fault. It's not anyone's fault. And I think sometimes, I don't know if it's a Presbyterian thing, we like to sort of dump it on ourselves. We like to sort of take the weight of it, I don't know, and feel like it's our fault and we did something wrong and woe is us. It's not. I think we're in like a Blockbuster video moment a little bit here. Okay? Blockbuster and other rental stores, video rental stores, went through this in the early 2000s, when people completely changed the way they accessed movies. So instead of driving to a physical store to rent a DVD or a VHS, for those of us that can remember VHS, we started getting our movies through the mail, via Netflix. DVD comes in the mail, and then you keep it and you put it back in the mail. That didn't last very long, though, because within a few years, we were just streaming the movies directly to our computer, to our TV, to our phone. We didn't stop watching movies, though. And people still want that experience that they get, and that feeling and that moment when you watch a movie, they still want that. But the way they're going to get it is completely different than it was before. I believe we're in a similar moment in the church. God is not shrinking or going away. People still want and need to experience the transcendent and the divine. They still crave and thrive in real community. They still want to be involved in causes and activities that mean something and that change lives for the better. But the truth is that fewer and fewer people want to experience those things in a Sunday morning worship service. followed by Sunday school class. That's just the truth. Which means that our programs and our buildings and our economic models, which are completely built around that model, they're no longer a good fit. We have too many buildings with too much space. And the spaces that we do have, beautiful large sanctuaries and hallways full of classrooms, they're just no longer useful in the way that they once were. Taking an offering during Sunday morning worship from a smaller number of people is not going to pay for our budgets or our deferred maintenance. And it doesn't help for us to blame ourselves or each other for these realities. It's as if we were to tell the manager of a local Blockbuster video store in the early 2000s that they just needed to try harder. Come up with a new sign, like a new marketing, slogan. Maybe put different videos on the shelf. Maybe hire a new, younger, hipper manager wearing tight jeans to turn it around and to keep that old model working. There's nothing the video store manager could have done in that situation, right? The social change that led to their closure was out of their control. So, the situation is not all doom and gloom. And it's definitely not our fault. Far from it. I think budgets and membership rolls may be shrinking, but God is not. Some traditional expressions of church will continue, just not at the size or scale in the 1950s, which, by the way, is kind of a blip in the historical church engagement anyways, and is really not the greatest measure of where we're at, right? Measuring against the 1950s. And just as Netflix and Disney Plus and YouTube came onto the scene, new expressions of what it means to be the gathered community of Jesus followers are emerging. New economic models for the church are being born. And new uses for church property are possible. We aren't broke. We have a lot of resources. We know how to build community and connect people. We know how to do community organizing, even if we don't call it that. Yes, many congregations are shrinking, but we are still rich with wonderful, committed people that have a wide array of gifts and talents to offer. We draw upon beautiful, centuries-old traditions, and we have been resilient during all manner of social change across the eras. And we have very valuable assets. A single Christian denomination, not Presbyterian, in North Carolina owns property estimated to be worth more than $1.5 billion. They're the second or third largest landholder in the state. That's one denomination. If you put all the Christian churches together, they rise right to the top. This property is vastly underutilized. Leaders within that same North Carolina denominational network estimate that even before COVID, church property is in actual use only 12% of the week. Think about that in your own context. How much of the time is your church building and property actually being used? That's a pretty underutilized asset, 12% of the week. The opportunity to repurpose, to reuse, to use in different ways, to redevelop, even a fraction of that underutilized resource is simply staggering. There will be grief and sadness as so many churches close in the coming years. Of that, there is no doubt. This is just true, and it is something that we can't rush past, right? Just as when a loved one dies, we must allow ourselves the space to celebrate past joys and to mourn our losses. Grief is real. At the same time, there is also an incredible opportunity to reimagine how church property could be used for innovation and transformation in this unprecedented time. For even as the changes and closures come fast and furiously, we aren't broke. Death and resurrection is central to the Christian faith. Just as the cycle of death and life turns fallen leaves into spring flowers, the closure of churches provides fertilizer and space for new growth to spring up. The closure and selling of churches will free up actually millions of dollars of new money over the next few decades. What are we going to do with that? Those of us that have the opportunity to decide what to do with that money, what are we going to do with that? We need to be sure to think about that carefully and use those resources well and not just let them kind of drain away in the same old patterns. Shifting the primary use of a church property from Sunday services to a co-working space, for example, is not failure, it is transformation. Supplementing income and mission activity by turning an unused education wing of a church into a grocery co-op that addresses neighborhood food desert is not failure, that is innovation. Closing a congregation after many years of fruitful ministry and perhaps tearing down a building that has had its life and then repurposing the property for affordable housing, that's not failure, that's rebirth. We may grieve the changes, we should celebrate the past, but let's also look forward to new life and what God will do through us next. And even with our decline, there is literally billions of dollars of investment funds in the PCUSA, in church investment accounts, in seminary and church-related college endowments, in the foundation, in the Board of Pensions, in judicatory portfolios, and more. While we wring our hands about decline, we hold literally billions and billions of dollars of investment assets as a church. And we hand most of that over to Mark Zuckerberg and others to grow their business. It's true. It's funny, but also not, because it's true. Right? The top holdings of many of our socially screened portfolios are Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, and Facebook, which is also Instagram, and Threads now too. We give the bulk of our capital, our church capital, to these companies, billions of dollars of it, and they use it to grow their business. They pay us a percentage back with dividends and increasing stock value. That's how the system works. Investing in those companies produces a nice return on our money, at least during some years, during a growth year. Perhaps we give those earnings that we get away for mission. More often, we keep it to keep our churches and institutions open. Sometimes we just put it back into our endowments and foundations, perhaps like the rich fool in Jesus' parable who builds larger and larger barns to save up for a future that never comes. In that case, it just ends up back in Mark Zuckerberg's hands again. But is this really the best use of the church's capital? So I'm going to pause here for a little bit and pause my talk and have a little bit of Bible study time, or Bible reflection time, let's say, right? I find this parable of the rich fool in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, to be really instructive on the subject of our resources, both our personal resources and those held by the church. So I'm going to read this, and if you have Bibles, I think you do have Bibles, grab a Bible and open to Luke 12. I don't know if we have the same version, but it'll work. Because I want to take a few minutes to talk about this together. Luke chapter 12, verses 13. You probably didn't expect some preaching today, huh, did you? Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." I'm going to do something that we like to do at Press House, which is actually interrupt our sermon and have you talk to each other. So turn to somebody sitting by you and talk for a few minutes about this parable. What is it that strikes you? What sticks out to you? And why was the man called foolish? Go ahead. From you all. I won't have a chance to do that right now, but maybe over dinner we can talk together. But if we come back together, I'm going to share with you a few thoughts of what I notice in this parable. I need a little bell or something. There you go. There you go. Thank you. All right. So here are a few things that I notice in this parable. The rich man in this story thinks he's being a good steward of a bumper crop by building more and larger barns to store his excess grain. Stewardship, a word we actually use a lot in the church. But then, as the Greek language makes more clear than the English, God calls in the loan that is the man's life. That's actually the way that language is worded. When God says that your life is being demanded of you, it's actually as if calling in a loan. The man doesn't get to enjoy any of the successful savings. Upon looking back through the story, it seems to me at least that the man is deemed foolish because he lays claim to all of this grain as his and his alone, and loses the sight of the fact that it's provided by God. Because the beginning of the parable, it's the land that produces abundantly, not the man. The land produces abundantly. But then right away, it's changed, and the man is calling it my grain, and my goods. The rich fool thought all of this wealth that he was blessed with and given was his. But in fact, his very life and all of that wealth was on loan to him by God. So whose money is it anyways? Really? A few years ago, I went back to school for an MBA. So after I'd done my MDiv, many years after, at UW-Madison's business school. We talked about this phrase a lot. Highest and best use. The purpose of capital is to seek its highest and best use. Conventionally, that has meant finding the highest rate of return with the lowest risk and putting our money there, building bigger and bigger barns. But is that really the highest and best use for our money, especially the church's money? We've gotten to a place culturally and practically where we assume that we have to make as much money with our money as possible. But that's an assumption. It's a construct that we have created for ourselves that is not fundamentally true. Now, I understand. I have an MBA. I understand markets. I understand that there are those sorts of realities going on, but fundamentally, the way we approach our capital and our resources, we have constructed this idea that we have to make the most money with our money at the lowest risk. We think about this in our own personal ways of investing or using of money and as a church. But the question for me is not how do we make the highest return at the lowest risk. It is what should we be doing with God's money that will have the greatest positive impact? Because whose is it anyways, really? The way we interact with money matters, right? It's not neutral. I think this is true in all four parts of what I call the life cycle of money: earning, giving, spending, and saving. We've talked a fair bit in the church about the theology around earning money, theology of vocation. We've talked a lot about giving money away, philanthropy and stewardship. We've grown a lot in recent years in our thinking about spending money. After all, it was churches who started the fair trade movement and raised awareness about how our buying choices impact lives. But in many ways, I would argue that we've neglected the conversation about the impact our saved money has in the church. We spend more time discussing where we buy the $500 worth of coffee we drink per year in our congregation than the billions of dollars that churches and denominations and related institutions are investing. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be talking about the coffee. We should. Right? But the investment side is a big deal. Now, we do some screening of bad companies like those that manufacture weapons or tobacco. That's great, also great. But by and large, fundamentally, we are content to take high returns from whoever will give it to us without much thought to the theological highest and best use. My experience with social enterprise and impact investing at Press House has totally changed the way I view capital in the church. I've discovered that there are other ways to use our capital besides simply earning returns over here and then spending that on operations and mission over there. This sort of two-pocket thinking, as it is often called. There's another way. Our capital can be used within the church and the communities that our churches serve alongside to change lives. We could start talking about the blended value of our investment returns, to borrow a phrase from Judd Emerson. The blended value comes from adding up both the financial return and the social impact to more fully describe the real return on our investments. So back when the Synod of Lakes and Prairies invested in us, could they have earned more financial return by keeping their funds in the stock market rather than investing in Press House? Probably, almost certainly actually over the time period that happened. But the Synod investment at Press House produced more than a financial return. It produced a life-changing return, transformation in the lives of thousands of students. I'm going to put that in the mail next time I send a check to PILP. We're sending you money, but we're also sending you impact. Creative expressions of mission and ministry are happening all around the country, using church property and investment assets differently. So, I work half-time at Press House. My other half-time role is as a co-founder of Rooted Good. Some of you played one of our games this morning in my workshop. Rooted Good is a national nonprofit that helps churches and church-related institutions use their property to generate revenue through new expressions of ministry. Through my work at Rooted Good, I've watched churches around the country go through our Good Futures Accelerator and come out the other side with all kinds of incredible ideas for the use of their buildings and land that's extending their ministry into the community in new and powerful ways and generating revenue for the church. So this is an image of sort of what the Good Futures course looks like. It includes printed materials and discussion guides, games, video content, books, and more. And it leads church leadership teams through a proven process that gets to them to a social enterprise idea using their buildings and land. It's about a 9-month process. I'm super excited actually to let you know that just last week, Rooted Good signed an MOU with the Presbyterian Mission Agency to make this course available to every Presbyterian church in the United States who wants to use it. We hope that will roll out in time for GA this summer. Congregations who have taken this course are serving young entrepreneurs by converting fellowship halls into co-working spaces, and drawing people into community who would never attend a worship service. They're organizing co-op grocery stores to address food deserts in their neighborhoods in a sustainable way. They're putting tiny houses on underutilized church property in order to provide homes for homeless neighbors. They're creating lawn care services and bike shops, music venues, and fair trade stores. Or they're building housing like we did at Press House. Sometimes for students, sometimes for seniors, sometimes for lower income neighbors who have been priced out of the market. We must be honest and admit that some of these sorts of enterprises are harder to create in rural areas and rural communities for a lot of sort of obvious reasons. But churches in rural communities are experimenting with their own interesting approaches. Some are installing electric car chargers in parking lots if they're near an interstate as cars go through. They can generate revenue that way and be kind of a hospitable presence. Others are partnering with healthcare systems in locations where healthcare is needed, but building a standalone healthcare center is not viable. So you have a healthcare need, you can't really afford to build a healthcare center. You have a church that has a lot of space, and you put those things together, and in a rural community, sometimes that can really work and really be a powerful ministry. These redemptive innovations require capital funding in order to get off the ground, and often at a different scale than the traditional grant or donor funding approach of the past. So affordable housing projects on church-owned land, they need concessionary financing that's willing to take a lower return so that that value can be put back into the project and increase affordability. These new expressions of social enterprise ministry need a different kind of funding than what we are used to doing in the church. Rather than making money in the stock market and then using the earnings to pay for programs, social enterprises need larger amounts of capital. All right, so I'm going to give you another example, if you'll stick with me here. Still talking about some money and some kind of slightly complicated arrangements, but let me give you another example. A few years ago, our local presbytery in the Madison area had to close a church in the city, okay? Something that we're all dealing with all the time. The lovely and faithful congregation had reached the end of its life. It was time to celebrate the fruitful ministry of many, many decades and close the church. The building was sold to a local Muslim community who have made it their home for worship, which is a wonderful sharing of space with neighbors. The funds generated by the sale of the building were about $1 million. And they were given away, all of that $1 million was given away to charities that members of the congregation cared about over the years. One of those charities was Press House, actually. So we received nice amount of donation from that sale. And we put it to work in the lives of college students, and I'm sure all the charities that received generous gifts helped also to provide food and shelter and other vital needs to the members of the Madison community. It was a beautiful gift that the congregation left. It was wonderful. In no way am I denigrating this approach that they took. But I have wondered since then, that what if we, the presbytery, had not given the entire $1 million away? And as much as I was grateful to receive that as a nonprofit leader, I wonder if we could have used those funds differently. What if we had used that money as seed funding, for example, for a permanent revolving loan fund to help build affordable housing in the neighborhood around that church, which is really needed? Imagine what a powerful legacy that church and our presbytery could have if we'd invested that money in a housing project that would have provided affordable living space for people in Madison while generating a small financial return and allowing us to continue to do that over and over again. The reason is that affordable housing is a very pressing need in Madison, as it is elsewhere in the country. A lack of quality, affordable housing has a negative ripple effect throughout the community. When a child comes home from school to sleep in a car at night, as many children in Madison do, unfortunately, he or she is going to struggle to get homework done and to succeed in school, and you sort of have this ripple effect. When families pay too much for housing, they have less money left over to spend on their other needs. Those are some of the very problems that churches and charities are trying to address, right? And we need to address those. We need to address those immediate issues. But there's root causes underneath those issues that we can also address with some of the capital that we have in the church. Concessionary funding to complete affordable housing projects is very difficult to come by. Imagine a community where a collection of churches has an aggregate of $1 million of endowment funds invested in traditional investments like the stock market, like Amazon and Apple and so on. The collective returns on that $1 million might average 5% annually, which is, amounts to $50,000 of investment earnings each year. Imagine that that group of churches gave away all $50,000 every year to the causes that they want to address, the negative outcomes caused by lack of affordable housing. I'm not sure that would actually happen, but imagine that happened, how beautiful that would be, right? But imagine now if this same collection of churches came together to create $1 million affordable housing fund with that money from those endowments and investments. And such a fund could help close financing gaps and catalyze the building of affordable housing where otherwise it couldn't be built. Not a donation, this money would stay in service and be recycled over time, allowing for the creation of multiple housing projects. Rather than helping Jeff Bezos roll out the newest Alexa device on Amazon, this money would be put to work helping house people in need of quality, affordable places to live. Churches would have an enormous social impact and earn a modest financial return on their investment. So instead of simply giving away the money to meet ongoing symptoms, these churches would be engaged in addressing root causes of those needs by helping to provide permanent long-term solutions. And rather than giving away or spending $50,000 per year buying some assistance, they've now put the whole $1 million to work to address those issues. Churches, judicatories, seminaries, foundations, even pension funds could be investing in low-income housing and student housing and job creation and church-hosted co-working spaces, cafes, microfinanced green energy projects, and so much more. And we're doing it a little bit here and there, but we could be doing it a lot more. Yes, it may be riskier than investing in Apple. Yes, the financial returns will often be lower than what Facebook can extract from our scrolling eyes all day. But again, what is our capital for? It is true, if it is true, that we put our money where our mouth is, then it appears we often have more faith in Mark Zuckerberg than in our own communities and the people that we work with. I told you might not like everything I was going to say today. So I'm going to be honest, I'm a little tired sometimes of hearing all the talk around the church about what we don't have, or that we don't have enough, because I just don't think that's actually true. As Mike Mather, a pastor in Indianapolis, has said, we can't do anything with what we don't have, but we do have something. We played a game this morning, Mission Possible, with pennies and glass jars and trampolines. We have something. We have something. Lots of somethings, actually. We aren't broke. There is property in the church. There is money in the church. And more important than all that, there are incredible people in the church. There's no better time for us to dream big and take some risks with the some things that we have. For what is there to lose at this point? Members? Buildings? I mean, we're kind of down that road. Like, we've gone quite a ways down that road at this point, right? The old model has taken us down that path. No, I think now is the time to dream big, to take some risks, to trust God and each other. Things aren't always going to work. Not all of these projects are going to work. That's okay. Now is the time to open up, maybe tear down some of those barns and put our grain to work. I remember a fad from my childhood that suddenly became all the rage. Magic eye books. If you remember Magic eye books? You look at this thing, they were like computer-generated images containing like colored squiggle lines, and you looked at it and it looked like nothing, but then if you stared at it in a particular way, kind of through it, you would see a 3D image would suddenly like pop out. Well, if you haven't had one or look for one, I don't even know if they still exist. So suddenly an image would come out like a dinosaur or a mountain scene or a person reaching out their hand. That was always a little creepy. But when viewed correctly, what appeared to be just empty, random colors on a page revealed itself to be something much more interesting and exciting. I think we're in a similar moment in the church. This sort of like a magic eye image. At first glance, it doesn't appear there's much left on the page. Years of decline and a fear of risk and failure and a perceived lack of resources have left us thinking there's just not much to work with. There's really just not much there. But if we look past those limits, sort of through them, look at them differently, something remarkable and beautiful comes into view. We see that we aren't broke, but we have enormous resources at our disposal. We see that there are different ways to put God's gifts to work in the world that can fuel innovation. We see that opening our barns and putting capital to work can help meet the needs of communities, address past and current injustices, and transform lives. As I look past the limits to see where we're headed, the image that enters my mind's eye is as of a garden about to burst forth in spring. The bedrock below is solid, built on sacred scripture, an ancient tradition that invite innovation in our practice and generosity with our money. The ground, it's fertile, filled with the seeds of ideas and entrepreneurs and new ventures bursting forth with new life. And all of the natural resources that this garden needs to grow are available to us in the form of our property and our buildings, our land, our money, and most of all, people. God is definitely the master gardener, but we are invited to come alongside and help. We have to join the effort. We're invited to cultivate this garden so that it is beauty and nourishment will feed and inspire us all, because we aren't, in fact, broke. So I'm going to pause here and give us a few minutes for break, because I think people might want a little bit of a break. But what I'd like you to do is you can certainly use, oh, there's my garden, I missed that. You can use this QR code to give me feedback later. But for today, if you have questions that you want me to respond to, if you could put them on your cards, on your index cards, over the next few minutes here while we take a break, then we'll collect those cards and I'll respond to some of those questions. And I'm going to do it this way in part just because I think it provides a little bit more equity in the way people ask questions, rather than having them taken from the pews orally. So let's take, what time is it? 10 minutes, 10-minute break. Be back here just a little after 3:30. And if you have questions, you can just bring them to me or leave them on your seat, and we'll collect those, and then we'll do some Q&A and then do a little other session.
Yeah, my whole question is, would you please sign this?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, let's all start coming back in. It's been about 10 minutes, right, Greg? We'll go ahead and start getting back in. Don't forget, if you have your card, if you fill out your card, you want me to pick it up, hold it up. Anybody have a question for Mark? Anybody? I'm trying, Mark. All right, everybody come on in and have a seat. We have one person that would like to bring greetings as well this afternoon. And what is it? Number 1, number 10 in your program, but number 1 in your hearts, right?
Yes, exactly.
So everybody welcome Steve Young from Living Waters for the World to take a few minutes to talk about what's going on in the world of water.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Mark. Y'all having a good time? Before I give you a quick update about Living Waters for the World, I wanted to let you know that I was speaking with Mark. I go to historic Franklin Presbyterian Church in Franklin, Tennessee, and our church manse is now a coffee shop. And that coffee shop stands for Inclusion and Diversity in Franklin, Tennessee. So it meshes well with what we're about as a church. And their rent funds most of our missions in the community. So I just wanted to say, this is resonating with me. Is it resonating with you, what Mark is sharing today? Yes, I think so. It's amazing to me to tell you this, but Living Waters for the World has been your water ministry for 30 years this year. 30 years. And I want you to know that some of our most valued volunteer leaders and some of our most wonderful water teams come from Kentucky presbyteries. Just going to take a flyer here. If you've ever been trained by Living Waters for the World, would you stand up so you can be recognized real quick? Please stand. Let's give them a round of applause, please. And if your church loves being part of Living Waters for the World, would you stand and let's recognize you, whoever that may be. All right, thank you. All right, let's advance the slide from the very beginning. This is what has driven us. All God's children deserve clean water. And, slide, together we can do something about it. Together we can do something about it. And next slide, the churches of Western Kentucky, Mid-Kentucky, and Transylvania, slide, are doing something about it. And I want to share some with you real quickly just to give you a highlight of what you are doing. Let's start with Western Kentucky, and let's look at First Presbyterian Madisonville. This year, they went to Ishkalak. Say that with me, Ishkalak. That is a Mayan community of 700 people in Campeche, Mexico. And what you see here is our coordinator on the left, the gentleman who's going to be running the water committee in Ishkalak in the middle, and Rick Lee from FPC Madisonville showing the signed covenant agreement to work together. Next slide. They poured footers to build the water building. They went and toured a facility down the road so they could imagine what their water system was going to look like. Next slide. And here they are posing, celebrating, completing the covenant for their church, and they're going to have water coming any minute. So let's give them a round of applause. What I love about what Rick and FPC Madisonville are doing is they've done it with us for 10 years. 4 water installations, and this time they invited Henderson, Kentucky Presbyterian to come with them, and so they're doing it together, and we're better together. Let's go to Mid-Kentucky. FPC Elizabethtown. Elizabethtown is our, are you ready for it, largest water partner. FPC Elizabethtown has made 30 water partnerships in the world, all in Guatemala, and the most recent one is here in Aldea Las Delicias in Guatemala. You see there on the left, they're learning about how to use clean water. On the right, the children are singing their song. Can you tell what song they're singing by their hands? Deep and wide. Okay, next slide. We love this. The children learn about how to wash hands, and then they put their handprints on a banner and they hang it up at the church. And it says, pure water plus clean hands equals healthy bodies. Amen? And so that's what they do. Next slide. And here's the completed water system on the left that's just happened. And the water celebration with people, he loves it just as much this time as he's loved it from the very, very first time. Let's give a hand to First Presbyterian Elizabethtown. And then we move to Transylvania, where they have a Presbytery water team. And the Presbytery water team is anchored by an icon at Living Waters for the World, Joni Lukens, there in the middle. Joni is an amazing person. She is flanked by Fanny and Angela, who are in-country health educators in the Yucatan Peninsula. And they just got through doing a really cool thing in China. Next slide. They took a place that's been making water for their community 20 years. And they totally rehabbed the whole system to make it have higher capacity so they can serve more families. You see them working on the left on the system, instructing on the system. Next slide. More handprints. Love handprints. And the children are singing songs in celebration of the new water system. Next slide. And here they are passing out cups of water from, look at that beautiful new water system. And here's the thing. This is not American churches providing clean water. That is not what Living Waters for the World is. Living Waters for the World is facilitating partnerships between churches here and churches there, so that together around the table they can fulfill God's vision that their community can have generational change. There are 600 million people in this world that get up today and don't have clean water to drink. In the year 2023, 600 million when you don't have clean water. So therefore, clean water is hope more than it's anything else. And if you're in these communities, it literally is medicine. So I know we live in a dark world. I know we think we are diminishing away. But I'm here to tell you that God is calling us to shine light into darkness. And you are doing that through your churches and all of your ministries. Mark's helping you see what you can do even more. And you're doing it through Living Waters for the World. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you just a minute.
All right, I think we have, if I'm right, till 5. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, so are there any other questions people want to put down on a card? And I'm actually not able to get to this right now, so if you have questions, put on a card. I don't know, wave it in here or something. Grab it. Somebody go grab it. So I'm going to just take a few minutes and respond to things that people might wonder about. And then we're going to do an exercise using this that some of you may have seen, hopefully. So, some of these are complicated questions, which we may or may not be able to do in this setting. But but let's get to a few of them. So one is a reflection and sort of a question on this issue of endowments, right? Many of our churches have endowments. Traditionally, they want to keep their endowments invested for monetary returns, which is what I did talk about there, and that is true. And budgets go into deficits when they don't, when they don't do that. And then also there's this question about invading endowments, like actually sort of using endowments. How do we break that paradigm to empower endowments to invest in the churches and people rather than just for financial return? Great question. I don't know that I have a sort of answer for all settings here. A couple things I think to note. One, endowment is actually a technical word, which does usually mean there's a restriction on it. So I try to sort of separate endowment from invested assets or saved assets, right? But most of the time we have both if we have some of that going on, right? So sometimes you might have a restricted pot that is an endowment that is like restricted by the giver or by something else. Sometimes it's restricted by the original giver. Sometimes it's restricted by a board that has decided, like a session or whatnot, to restrict it. And in those cases it can be changed. If it was an original giver, it's a little bit harder, although you can sometimes go back to families and ask about that too. There's a couple possibilities here. One is that what I've been describing about investment does not actually require using the endowment differently. It's actually talking about investing it differently. And there's a big difference there, right? And so even where we have pots of money that are very restricted, like somebody once told me, I don't know if anyone knows this is true, you're probably here, that the Presbyterian Foundation has a fund to provide pencils to like some very subset of people. Somebody gave a donation to provide pencils forever to, I don't even know who it was, but it's essentially a fund that it can't be used. I have a fund at Press House that was given 50 years ago to provide loans to students at a time when getting loans was very hard. Nowadays, getting loans is actually not very hard. It's probably, well, there's a lot of issues with student loans, but it's not hard to get loans and nobody wants to use it. So we have this fund that sits there and we can't really use the earnings. However, in both of those cases, we could invest those funds differently. So what I'm not necessarily saying that we take the money and kind of use it differently, but we take the money and we invest it differently, and where it's invested still generates financial return, but it's actually doing something different while it's invested. So it could be invested in affordable housing fund. It could be invested in green energy. It could be invested in microfinance in Guatemala, for example. I'm actually taking a group of students to Guatemala in January to visit microfinance institutions there where we can invest money. So that's one way of addressing that question. If this question was more about how do we change minds, I mean, that's a harder one, right? That's, that's for the pastors to figure out. I don't know. It's, we do it together, right? We go on a journey. We experiment. At Rooted Good, we like to encourage churches to do what we call meanwhile projects. So it maybe is way too big of an idea to sort of say, you know what, we're going to take 2 acres of our land and we're going to put up a housing facility on it that's going to cost $10 million and 7 years of work. Okay, maybe that's great. Maybe start with renting out your kitchen to an entrepreneur who wants to bake in a kitchen, and then an entrepreneur of color who's getting started or something like that. Start there, like a project that you can actually kind of tackle in a small amount of time, and then learn from that. How do we do this together? How do we figure out how to adjust our processes so that we can do these things? How do we build trust in doing new things? Those sorts of projects that head you towards something else can be really valuable. And I think the same could be done with investment. Do we need to take the entire portfolio and move it into impact tomorrow? I'd love that, to be honest, but maybe not. Maybe we start with 10%. Just 10% is better than none, right? And so we take steps towards it. So that's a reaction to that. Whether I helped answer that question or not, we'll see. You can tell me over dinner. So there's a question about legal structures. And there's a lot potentially here. What legal structures have been created to support reuse of assets? What problems have been created with local state government entities when church property is used differently? Yeah, so those are 2 questions, but both good. I think what I would say about some of that is that there are many, many ways to do legal structures. Just about every idea you can think of has there can be a different legal structure associated with it. As well as around taxation. So that's a big question people often ask about taxation. Well, we can't do this because it will jeopardize our property tax or our tax status, or it will incur taxes. We have Rooted Good has a tool about taxation. I handed out a few of those to folks this morning. It helps you understand the implications of taxation. I think the bottom line thing I would say, I am not a tax expert. Do not put the IRS on me if you make a mistake. You always have to consult a true accountant and lawyer on these issues, but we are way more afraid of taxes than we need to be, is the bottom line. There are many ways to address this issue. One of the simplest is just pay them. So I have a cell phone tower on my roof at Press House. It generates $30,000 a year in revenue. It's great. It just sits there. I don't do anything except once in a while renegotiate the contract. We pay taxes on that, though, because that's unrelated business income, and it's a taxable revenue source. We generate $30,000 and we pay $5,000 in taxes. I still make $25,000 a year doing nothing except having this tower on the roof. I'm not trying to get out of the taxes. I just pay them. It's fine. It's easy. It's part of the cost of the thing, right? I'm looking for a net gain. So that's one solution. And there are other solutions. Churches often need to think about creating a separate nonprofit entity because nonprofit entities can have a wider range of what constitutes their mission than a church can. And so a lot of times there are things that would be potentially unrelated business for a church, but for a different sort of nonprofit would be okay. So that's one way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. The other thing I think I'd say on this is don't skimp on spending money getting real expert advice, right? So if you're going to enter into a social enterprise, you're going to have to spend money on legal advice. You're going to have to spend money on accounting. You're going to have to spend money on staffing and on managing that stuff. That's all part of the cost of the project. I've had a lot of people ask me about, well, do you sign leases? Like, do I sign leases at Press House? No, I've never signed a lease. In 20 years, I've never signed a lease. Do I, deal with a lockout when somebody? No, I don't do that. We have a property management company that we pay to manage those things, and the costs of all of that are just part of a social enterprise. So sometimes in the church, we're so good at kind of bootstrapping everything, we'll just clear the snow. Well, you probably don't clear as much snow as I do, but we'll clear the snow ourselves, right? We'll cut the grass ourselves. We'll do this ourselves. That's great. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when you're doing a social enterprise, you're going to have to pay for services, and that's part of the cost of it. And the idea is you build a business model that generates enough revenue, then you have expenses that you take off of that, and then you still have income after that. And that's just part of it. So it's always going to involve partnering and paying for some of those services. There was this question here about government entities, and I think it's a mixed bag. Sometimes they can be super, super helpful and supportive, and sometimes not so much. And it depends a little bit on what we're trying to do. I think obviously the more we can partner with government entities in a productive fashion, the better, because that helps our communities in general. That's so specific and localized. It's really hard to generalize around how that ends up playing out. But I have found that there is increasing interest from government entities around this question of church land in particular. So even in Madison recently, we are updating our comprehensive plan, and I was in conversation with the planning department over the summer about all the church properties in Madison, and they didn't even realize this was happening, and that they were going to have to adjust their comprehensive plan in order to allow for redevelopment on these properties. And we've made some real great headway already in doing that. So those conversations are worth having. What else can we answer in the brief amount of time here? Someone said, why not invest in videos and movies since tech is the future? That's a good question, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what is the future, right? What is it? I actually... That's an interesting question. I think what we want to think about is what do we offer that really contributes to a community. And that's actually a great segue into the exercise we're going to do in a minute here. But for me, the key to thinking about doing a social enterprise is it's connecting a church's or community's passions and what it can offer with what a need and opportunity in that community, and making that connection, not sort of pulling out something out of thin air, right? So I said earlier I don't really believe in models, and this is why. For us, on a university campus, addressing issues that relate to where students live was a very sort of direct way for us to connect what we had, land, and the ability to gather students together, with what was needed, housing and housing-related things like sober housing and vocational exploration and wellness and all these other things that happen in housing. We were able to come together around a project that did that, right, that made that connection. It doesn't make any sense to put college student housing where there's no college, right? Or I've seen the opposite, where people say, well, let's build family affordable housing. We're right next to a campus, a college campus. Why would we do that? Let's build college housing where we need, or something else entirely, right? So a lot of the projects I've seen that are most effective connect with a need in the community or an opportunity in the community and the church's passions. So if the church has a beloved music ministry of 50 years, and they just have had this deep, rich music ministry that probably manifested in a traditional choir and Oregon concerts and those sorts of things for many, many years, but needs sort of to reconnect with its neighborhood, then the church looks at building out a like music performance and recital space and practice space and partnering with music providers in the community, basically, that are teaching kids in various ways. And you can actually create an entire social enterprise around that that's both revenue generating and really great for the community. And it's connecting a beloved thing with a new thing, right? Some of the churches we've seen doing grocery stores, grocery co-ops, started with a food pantry, right? A beloved food pantry that's been going on forever and ever and ever. And they say, can we do something more with that food pantry? Let's make it much bigger, and let's invite the neighborhood to own it together as a co-op. And we're actually going to have a grocery store. And instead of just handing out, giving away food, we might give away some food, but we're going to actually sell food as a grocery co-op, and it's going to be owned by the community. And we're going to address like a real issue of a food desert in our neighborhood. So, but again, it connects between what they like to do and what they know how to do to some extent with what the opportunity is. And it's not just dropping something out of thin air. I'm not a fan of innovation just for innovation, just to like grab some new shiny thing. It's like trying to actually connect deeply with what we're doing and who's around us. So I think I might actually pause there, and if there's other questions, we can do them over dinner and so on. But if folks have this what next guide, hopefully you have it somehow, or someone sitting by you has it. And I am going to actually invite you in this moment to sit with people from your church or your location, if you can. So I'm going to do the opposite of what was asked earlier of mixing. You can do that over dinner. So let's unmix, because this exercise will work better if you're sitting with people that either you came with or from your church or from your neighborhood. Doesn't matter, actually. Like 2, 3. You're going to be talking in your rows, so the best 2, 3. And hopefully you have access to this either digitally, electronically, or a paper copy, or someone in your little group does. Down. This is quite a shuffling we got going on here. All right. That means you guys are all mixed in. Nice, that's good. So if you are just with one or two people that you know or are connected to, and if you don't have somebody, then insert yourself and find a partner or a group to join. And we're going to do this exercise. Those of you that were in my workshop this morning are going to have a nice jump start on this because you will have an idea of how we think about these things. But I'm going to help lead us through this session. So this will be about an hour, and I'm a big fan of like trying this stuff out for ourselves and not just sort of listening to me talk. So I'm going to push us a little bit to do that together. This resource, What Next? Rooted Good during the pandemic, we created two resources. What Now? Which was right in the middle of the pandemic, about how to basically be the church in that moment. And then we created a resource that came just after that, What Next, as we were sort of emerging from the pandemic. But it's still very relevant for us today. We're not going to go through this entire resource because it will take a little bit too long. But this is designed, you are welcome to use it in your setting. It is designed for a church session or a small group of leaders or even a program within a church to work through in one long or two sort of medium length sessions without any help from an outside consultant or anything. You can just work through the exercises that are in here. And I'm going to help us go through a few of them today and to come up with some ideation around some of these ideas around social enterprise or just what it even means to be the church today. And the kind of premise is understanding who we are and then connecting that with what's going on around us and coming up with some new ideas. Okay, so here we're going to start with the very beginning, the opening page, which is this diagram drawing. And what I want you to do is just turn to the people that are with you and take a moment to point something out on the page in these stormy seas of this moment, which you can interpret however you want. Where do you find yourself? Where do you feel, what do you feel right now? Where do you find yourself in this moment, in this drawing? And how does that connect with your life and or the life of your church? So just take 2 minutes and just share with each other, where are you on this drawing? Go ahead. I want you to turn now to page 8. Hopefully that just gets you kind of in the mood. Page 8, turn to page 8. And what we have, actually, right? And so this is, page 8 is an opportunity to think about where are you at your best? And I think I'd situate this in the congregation context. If you think about your congregation at its best, what words come to mind? So you can take a minute or so to maybe think on that yourself and then share that with your group. You're welcome to write these down or do whatever you want with them, but come up with a few words for your congregation at its best. If you're sitting with somebody that's not in your same congregation, share with each other your own, from each other's congregation. So go ahead and do that. All right, you can now just turn one page over to page 9. Turn one over to page 9. And here I want to invite you to reflect on some new things that you have tried. Now, at first you might be like, well, we haven't tried anything in a while. But I'm guessing that you've tried something new in the last few years. Probably maybe related to the pandemic, something new, right? What is a few, and if not, go back further. Go back as far as you need to go back to something new that you have tried in your congregation. And write down however many of those ideas you can think of, and then there's a sort of a little, you'll see those little boxes, you can reflect on that a little bit. How did it go? What did you learn? But just get in that mindset of what have you tried and how did it go? So spend a little bit of time talking about that. It could be anything. It could be related to worship. It could be related to leadership structure, property, anything. Doesn't matter. What are some things that you've tried? right, could I get 3 groups or people to yell out something you've done or tried in your congregation? Could I get 3 people to yell out something you've done or tried? Online? Yeah, on streaming worship. Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Church bus to enable.
Oh, start.
Church bus to transport people.
Sure.
Look at our church, they've got one at Stanford.
Yeah. Community garden. Community garden. Electric charging. There you go. You just did that after my idea I said earlier, right? Like no. You already had it. That's awesome.
Business incubator.
Business incubator. Okay. Oh, yeah.
President Hill started a Guns to Gardens group.
Guns to gardens. Yeah. Great.
Guns to Gardens is where people surrender guns they no longer want, and on site they're chopped up in their presence and recreated in the garden.
Cool. Good. All right. So we've got some ideas going of things we've done already, right? Okay. All right. We're going to move into a different phase of this. So page 12. Page 12. So there's a circular little map here, and it's designed to look at some of the different needs. You might want to say opportunities as well. Sometimes need feels a little bit, sort of negative, like not super asset-based. So, but needs, opportunities, the full exercise is for both your congregants and then for the wider community. I'm going to say today we want to just talk about the wider community. I'm going to assume you actually know quite a bit about your congregants, but maybe sometimes takes a little bit more thought about the wider community. And so take some time, this will be a little bit more time, to jot down needs and opportunities in these various areas: physical, emotional, relational, practical, spiritual, anything that you can think of. I mean, a new business incubator was probably addressing something that was going on in the community that needed to be, yeah. So, and think, again, primarily about people outside of the congregation, in the community, and what is it that if you were to go, let's put it this way, if you were going to go interview 5 people in your community, like a mayor or an alderperson, or a county executive or something, a school principal, maybe, perhaps a philanthropist or somebody, just a neighbor that's down the street from the church, and interview those people. What would they say are the most pressing needs and sort of where the things are at in your community? Does that make sense? So think about that, and actually that's a great exercise to do, by the way, those interviews. But think about that and jot those down on here, okay? I'm going to invite us to move on a little bit further to skip all the way ahead to page 24. So there's some good stuff we're skipping, but we can't do it all today. So we're going to skip all the way ahead to page 24, which is looking at resources. And if you were in the morning session, you'll recognize some of this because these are similar categories of resources. And so before I say anything more about that, just on the question of community need and opportunity, I actually really do encourage you, if you haven't done that in a while, to do what I described, which is to do little interviews with people in your community and ask them those questions. To make a sort of standard set of questions and ask them what do they think is going on in the community? Where do they see it going? How do they view your church? Do they even know about your church? Is always a good question, right? If the church could do anything in your community to address something that they care about in their role, what would it be? Ask them that question, right? And do some of those interviews. Super, super useful feedback around what's going on in your community. So on the resources side, as you obviously gathered, I'm a big believer in us recognizing what we have. And obviously, wider range of churches represented here, some that have a lot more in traditional kind of context than others or sort of understanding. But all of them, I believe, have assets and resources and wonderful gifts. And so this is a time to think about what those are. So whether that's financial, whether that's property, land, buildings, whether that's equipment. We have a lot of stuff lying around in our churches sometimes that we could actually use. Whether that's, somebody was telling me earlier that they have, I think it was 4 or 5 acres of land, and half of that they just mow. It's just grass that they mow. Could we do something with that? I mean, maybe even a soccer field. It's on the grass, right? Or something else. But so take an inventory of some of the resources that you have in your congregation and think as creatively as you can about it. So obviously money in the bank is an obvious one, or buildings is an obvious one, but there might be some slightly less obvious ones. And think about that. And then people needs to be on there too. So people, resources, what people's gifts are, who they're connected to, who you might be connected to. Maybe your church has a long, deep, rich connection to somebody in the community or some set of people. So think about that for a little while, because really reflecting on what we have is a great way to bring these things together. So what resources do you have in your congregation? And just so you're clear, there's multiple pages here, so you can work your way through them, right? 24, 25, yeah. Can we hear some resources? Can I have some people just yell out some resources that your congregation has, real quick? Just yell them out. What resources do you have? Commercial kitchens. Yep. Okay. What else? Other resources that you have? Playground. Okay. People who know how to advocate, okay, yep.
Daycare.
Daycare? Airbnb. Airbnb? Cool. I want to hear more about that. Okay, parking lot where you could put solar panels above it. Great idea.
Connections to other organizations.
Connections to other organizations. Partnerships. Connections to other organizations, so partnerships. Yep.
Talent within your community that you could share.
Talent that could be shared. Good. Great. These are great. Okay, we're going to do one last step. We can't, again, do all of it. So I'm going to have you turn to, page, let's find it. We're going to do kind of close to the final step here. Page 29, I think it is. No, sorry, 30, page 30. The idea. Okay? So, what I want you to do is take one of the needs that you talked about and set it next to some of the resources that you have and see if you can come up with one possible idea of how to make that happen in your congregation. Now, does it actually have to happen? No, doesn't. Don't get too hung up on that, but just an idea that could potentially be floated, talked about. So you've got a need that you looked at earlier in your community, and you've got your list of resources. Put those together. What is one idea? And there's an example on the page if you want help with an example. What is one idea that you could do? Ignore the bottom where there's constraints and all that. We didn't do that section. Listen, we're gonna say there's no constraints that you can do anything here, which is obviously not realistic, but for today we're gonna live in that world. And so an idea with your resources, a need with your resources, what's an idea you could do with your commercial kitchen, right? Does that make sense? So do that for a little bit, and then we're gonna wrap up from there.
masterwoman of the ladies auxiliary, was her helper, and my sister was the organist, the grandma, and everything. We stayed at home the whole time. And he was there. Great.
She did that. You know, once
All right. Going to wrap us up here. And what I want to do is this. I'd love to hear all your ideas, but that's not realistic. So what I want to do is I want to invite you to find somebody else in the room that you don't know. Maybe you can do it really close, maybe not. And take the last 5 minutes, 2 minutes each, plus a minute to move, to share with each other your idea. So you share your idea, and they share their idea with you, and you hear each other's idea, and we'll wrap up that way. And if you want to continue that conversation over dinner, I think that happens next, or whatever happens next. So find someone you don't know and share, or don't know as well, and share your idea. Hey.
Do I have permission to make photocopies of this to give to my session?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that would be great.
Yeah.
You said you do have, on your website, do you have like a consulting, you said you do some consulting or?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to call us back together one last time because I know how important it is to get to food on time and the things that really matter. So if you would wrap up your conversation one last time, yes. I hope you had some good conversations. It sounded like you were talking with each other at least, so that is good. I need someone to do the clap to get us going. Here we go. There we go. All right. Well, that's a weird clap, but okay.
Are we clapping you?
No, we're just trying to get everyone's attention so I can wrap us up and we can move on here.
Or is Philip going to have our prayer now?
Well, I think he is, so...
You don't have to clap.
Good. Can everyone hear me? I know it's a little weird, the sound in here, so I'm going to just wrap up. Just say thank you for indulging me with this exercise and going through it. I hope some of it was helpful to you. You're welcome to keep that resource and do anything you want with it. This particular resource is free, so you can copy it, you can distribute it, you can do whatever you want with it. Some of the other stuff at Rooted Good is we do sell, and if you want any of that material, if you grab one of these postcards. One side is Rooted Good Resources, which will take you a link to our website. The other side is a link to my website with information about my new book. And a few people have asked me about my current book, We Aren't Broke. I do have some copies. They're in the, I don't know what they call it, the gym, where the food is. So there are some down there. If you want to buy a book, you can do that. It's Venmo or cash, basically, but you're welcome to do that. And I'll sign it if you want. That's fine. So there's some of those available. And I think I'm done, and thanks for having me.
Good job. Yes, thank you, Mark. It was a good afternoon. Thank you all again for coming. So to the right, all the way down to the end of the hall, take another right. Is that the quickest way to get there? Okay. And then but it's kind of down these stairs, take a right and another right, and you'll find, just smell. Follow your nose. It smells great down there. Around 6 o'clock, we're going to come back in here for a quick evening prayer. And then we're going to have the desserts and stuff outside so we can continue conversations. So as I was telling, I think it was Daryl, I know that when I used to go to Presbytery meetings, I wanted to get some value out of it. You know, I got to have some content. We do conferences and people wanted to know who's going to be the keynote speaker. I got to learn something. I'm coming, the more I do this, the more it's like, maybe we just need to be with one another, just to eat with one another, just to share our lives and our conversation, that, you know, being together may be enough. And what Mark did was on top of that. So hopefully you'll take the time to have dinner with your Presbyterian family, and then come back here for a brief worship and have some more time to talk, connect with people, and very excited about the opportunities. Do we have anybody who knows how to pray for dinner? Anybody? Anybody that's done that before in here? Anybody want to raise their hand, or are you going to make me call on you? Because I will. Who's going to do it? Brad? All right, Brad's going to do it. I tell you, would think y'all be a little more eager to pray, but that's, you know.
I'm Brad Palmer from Presbyterian Mid-Kentucky, and I'm pastor of the Eminence Presbyterian Church. It's good to see you all. Let us pray. Holy God, we give you thanks and praise for this opportunity to learn new ideas and to be excited once again about what it means to be Presbyterian. We ask your blessings upon our time at the dinner table, blessing the hands of those who prepared it in our time this evening. May you continue to bless us each and every day. In your most holy name we pray. Amen.